Welcome. So good to have you guys once again for another interview. I'm excited to introduce our next guest, Jade. She is such a beautiful person, really. When I met her, I knew that God just brought her into Spark Joy Ministries because she does virtual assistance work, but also she is basically not new to child loss. And so when I heard that she experienced the loss of her son this year, I just knew that at some point maybe I would get the privilege to interview her and to find out what happened, just to honor her son. Right. And so I wanted to introduce Jade to you. Here she
Thank
is.
you. Thank you for having
And
me.
she's a wonderful communicator. She's a positive person. I just know that God has great plans for her, and I'm honored that she's a part of, what we're doing at Spectrum Ministries. So I appreciate you. And let's jump in and just tell us about a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So have been married almost 5 years. I have two small children, 4-year-old named Jonah, and I have a 2-year-old named Eden, a boy and a girl. Um, I have had an online business I started about a year ago, just over a year ago, and so I do a lot of virtual assistants, helping out Jen, and I'm a certified life coach and actually hoping to get training with a Christian counseling certificate within the next year. And so that's kind of a big goal and dream of mine. But I love that you mentioned how we got connected and started working together, because I started working with you and I loved what you were doing with Spark Joy Ministries. But that happened before I experienced child loss of my own. So I was really passionate about what you were doing, but I experienced child loss, and it was just like this whole new perspective of what it really meant, the weightiness and the real need to be a support to women. It was just it completely opened up to me. And so it was a devastating experience, but to come on the other side of that and be able to offer an entirely new level of compassion and understanding, and just a desire to really fill in the gap where women are in need, and our hearts are hurting, and to come in like as the love of the Father and to just meet those needs is just a whole new thing to me. So I thank you for having me with you and serving you in this way.
It's the pleasure's really mine. So thank you for being open, especially since, I know it's hard. Like everyone experiences grief and loss differently, but even to talk about it in the first year, I mean, it's a very individual thing. Some people are super open and they just want to talk about it to whoever will listen. And some
Right.
people just really don't want to go there because they're just afraid of crying and all the triggers, and that's okay too. So I know it happening this year for you is absolutely devastating for me, but certainly for your family. So can you just tell us about what happened with your son, Bright?
Yeah. So as I was thinking about meeting with you today, I was looking at the calendar and I was like, we're in September. And I was like, it feels like it's been a while since this has happened, but it's not been that long though either. Um, and so just when you're processing the grief and when you're experiencing everything, you're just like in this dark cloud for a while, and then it starts to lift off and you're like, okay, where am I? What day is it? What year is it? What's going on in the world around me? And even right now, with the way that things are in the world with the coronavirus, and just there's just so much. And so it's just been really disorienting. I think more than anything, it's so disorienting. So let me back up. Um, my husband and I, we had our two children, and then we found out in June of 2019 that we were expecting. And within about 6 months, was showing very, very small signs of miscarriage. I had not gone to the doctor. I just had a positive pregnancy test. I knew I was pregnant. And so I knew that we had a miscarriage in June of 2019, but it was so, it was so small. I didn't share with a lot of people what happened. There were no real signs other than my hormones just being crazy and me asking all these hard questions like what happened. And there was no real like grieving period for me with that. And so that happened in June of 2019, and I only shared what happened with a couple of people, and I didn't really process through things well. I didn't really take time to grieve. I didn't really take time to think about what it meant, because it just, in that first 6 weeks, it just comes and goes, and it affects you. But then if you're not taking time to really feel what that means, then you just try to move on. You just try to just glaze over it. Well, that's kind of what I did. So, and I think it was around October, later in the fall of 2019, we found out we were pregnant. And I don't remember if I even had the thought, oh, I just had a miscarriage. I think it kind of came to me, but I tried to just, like we do, we want to move on, and I'm having a baby now, let's move on. And so that's what I did, and the pregnancy was going well. And then around 13, I was supposed to be around 13 weeks, and we went in, and there was no heartbeat. And that's the most devastating, because you're there and you're checking on the baby, and it's supposed to be this, this fun, and it's another one of those milestones. You're hearing the heartbeat, and it's at first it's one of those awkward things where the midwife's checking around and she's like, I don't hear it. Let me bring someone else in. Let's bring some other people. Let's try this. And I'm still not getting a heartbeat, so we need to set up an appointment to go get a sonogram and be sure. And she tried to say things to me like, I don't want you to freak out. I don't want you to be nervous. It's okay. Sometimes this happens, but we just want to go. We want to schedule an appointment to be sure. And of course, what am I going to do other than just freak out? I tried not to freak out, but I wanted to prepare myself for the worst too, because if you think you're going to hear that news, your heart goes there. Your heart is already accepting loss. And so I was trying to rein myself in and deal with all of those emotions. But we went the next day, got a sonogram, and it was confirmed there was no heartbeat. So we went through a long journey, my husband and I, of processing that on our personal level. What's that mean, not just for us, but what do we believe about this? What do we believe about God? You ask so many questions when death comes. When death comes to your door, it's a challenge. You start saying, God, who are you? Who am I? How does any of this make sense? It's not fair. All of those heavy, heavy questions, and you just feel them so strongly. And so my husband and I went through just a period of a few weeks. We didn't have a DNC. We went through just waiting. And that was hard. It was very hard waiting for the baby to pass naturally. And so we just really tried to lean into the Lord during that time, and we didn't know how. We didn't know what that looked like. But the one thing I remember after that time, just wrestling through our thoughts and our emotions and our questions and our accusations at God, the only thing I remember after that time was that I gained. In that season, I gained things from the Lord, and I learned things about my son that I wouldn't have known if I hadn't have kept my heart engaged. And hope does not disappoint. And I didn't believe that. It's scripture, it's the truth, but deep down, I didn't believe hope does not disappoint. I didn't want to get my hopes up for anything. I had dealt with disappointment before this. And so I didn't want to go there. I didn't want to have hope for anything. But in that time, I had to believe. And so I started asking questions and seeking the Lord. And even though I didn't understand, I was able to, in that time, have hope and understand what hope meant to me. And then even after we lost him and we had to go through the process of me holding my baby, who was very, 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 very small, and us burying him, and just the total just confusion around that and the lack of support around that. Even through that whole process, at the end of it, I was able to say to myself and to other people, hope does not disappoint. And it's hard to even say that, like to muster those words now, because when you look at such an injustice and you look at something that's so like devastating and just like sensitive to your heart and something so real, after our journey with that process and just wrestling through what that was, I came to the other side of that. And I think the biggest lesson that I've learned for myself and in my relationship with God is that it's true. Hope does not disappoint. And when you get into those circumstances that are so heavy and so weighty and traumatic, it can often feel insincere or harsh to say that hope does not disappoint. No one in that place wants to feel hopeful. Like when I was first experiencing what was happening, I didn't feel hopeful. There was no hope. I didn't want to feel hopeful. Don't tell me to feel hopeful. That's a fair response. That's a natural response. And I think that the Lord feels that way too. I think that it's all throughout scripture. When he came to the tomb of Lazarus, he was saying, I just need a minute. I need a minute to deal with how sucky this is. And he took that time to do that. And so I think that that's our natural response, because it's his natural response. And so I think we need to be mindful of that and have grace for ourselves in that place, that hope isn't void of pain. hope is moving on in spite of pain, and taking the pain and making it obedient to the power of Christ, and to redemption, and to joy, and to resurrection power, right? That our children are somewhere hopeful. They're somewhere and they're joyful and they're whole.
Yeah, I mean, you said a really great point as far as making the hope obedient, or the pain obedient.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes we can feel stuck, and sometimes it's okay. Sometimes we need that season to allow ourselves to feel. Otherwise, like you said, with the first one, miscarriage, it was different than the second one, obviously, because of the weeks and the development of the baby. But
right.
That's what happens if we don't let ourselves feel the pain, but we also make it obedient to Jesus, because that's what he did for us too. The example that he gave us to make his pain obedient. He didn't just say, well, I'm just not going to die on the cross for you guys, because that's just too much. That's too painful. He did weep and ask the Father to take it away from him, but he was obedient to death on the cross. So it's a great example for us. Yeah. I want to, I two things. I wanted to bring up the fact that, like, some of you guys who are listening to this, you kind of feel like because your baby was too early, almost like Jade did, it was only 6 weeks, that maybe somehow you can't grieve that loss, or somehow other people around you minimize the fact that you lost a baby because it was so small. I just want to say to you that it's okay for you to feel that way, but also okay for you to grieve the loss of your child, because no matter how small, or even if they're unseen, that is perfectly supported. And there's many people who don't process that, and then it might take them a second loss to really process what it means that you literally lost 2 babies in a year.
Yeah.
And that's a hard fact for anybody. So it's okay for you to give yourself grace, like you were talking about.
Yeah.
I know that you said something about not feeling fully supported. I don't know if that was not feeling fully supported because you chose to bury your child, or if it was just the typical of what some of us experience in the loss community. People don't know how to reach out and really ask you the right questions or really be there for you, maybe more than a couple weeks. But can
Yeah.
you expound on that just a little bit?
Yeah. So with the first miscarriage I experienced, I only shared with a couple of people. But one of the people that I shared with, there was no follow-up. So that was the hardest thing. And I think that that left some wounds that deeply affected me with my second miscarriage and made me really hesitant to share and to ask for support. And specifically in that relationship with that one person, which I probably need to, have some forgiveness and all that stuff there. But again, I think it's fair to take the time to to heal my own heart and work through that process when it's right. But that, I would say that was the hardest thing in both experiences, was is people, they don't always know how to ask. They don't always know how to ask how are you, or are you okay? They don't know what to say. But that's okay. Like, to me, that's fine. But not asking or not following up, like in this example with this one person, I shared with her a lot of what I was thinking and the hard questions. And you kind of get hit sometimes with a like a blocked hand, like, kind of oh, that's a hard question, I don't want to go there with you, like, that's not what I'm dealing with right now, so I'm going to give you kind of a false band-aid in your pain. And then they leave it at that, and they don't ever come back around and say, how are you dealing with that thing? I know I don't know how to answer that hard question either, but are you okay? And I never received any of that from someone that I was very close to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is very hard. I know exactly what you're talking about. I know a lot of us have experienced that too, just changes in your relationships. You really just don't know what it's like. And maybe part of it is you've changed. Like, you can't lose a child and just be the same person. You've improved, you've maybe gotten a little more angry or bitter at little things in life. And that's kind of the process and the journey. But for quite a while there, I felt angry too about certain relationships that I was a part of a mom's group, and supportive in the beginning, but I ended up leaving that year that we lost our son, just because I was like, I don't feel like these people are genuine. They're just, you know what I mean? Not that you're wanting to become bitter, because I think that's not a good place either.
Right.
But to acknowledge that things change and people don't really understand. That's why we got to advocate for what it's like for us and really what we need from other people if we care about them a lot. So.
Yeah, that's true. A friend of mine told me with the situation was, we have to adjust our expectations. And I think that that's fair. I think we need to hear that. We do need to adjust our expectations. But something that I heard you share one time was that it's also our job to communicate what we need to those people, to say, hey, when you said this, it made me feel this way and it didn't help me. But when you said this, it was very helpful. So if you could say more of that, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, I can think of an example, like the second Christmas for our son, and my mom has been there through my grief journey, but just not like you would think she'd be a little more emotional about it. But I think it's hard for her, so she just kind of wants to move on. And so I was talking to her about how there was no one mentioned him, at Christmas. And she's kind of like, well, what do you want me to do? I can't bring him back. What do you want me to do? Buy a gift for him? So I realized even me advocating for what I wanted and sharing that I just wanted him acknowledged, and it's not like it was anything particular that she needed to do.
Right.
I learned from that point on that I had to let go of my expectations of what she might do, because
Yeah.
maybe I knew something that would make me feel better, but it wasn't necessarily making her feel better because she's a
Yeah.
grandparent. So I can't imagine being a grandparent where your daughter totally loses her son, and you just kind of want to move on. You want to see them just live their life and have joy, not be stuck in this grief and loss space. But
Yeah.
kind of follows you the rest of your life. It's not a bad thing, but it does follow you, and it's a part of who you are now.
Yeah, that's a really great point, because something that might be helpful for me might actually be hurtful for someone else. So it's like we have to we have to come together and know those things, and not necessarily compromise, but respect those boundaries, and be able to fulfill those needs in maybe a different way.
So tell me about how you guys chose a name for your son.
Well, that's funny. So his name is Joel Bright, and we were in a church service probably like a year after we had our first son, and the guy who was speaking about Joel, and he was reading a scripture from Joel, and it was one of those moments where he read the scripture and then he said, he repeated where it was from in the Bible, Joel, and my husband and I just looked at each other. And it was like that moment where we were looking at each other and we were like, that's the name of our next child. And so it stuck with us. And so we know that there was a very specific purpose for him, and he had a very specific, gift and uniqueness about him. And so that's how he got his name, Joel. And we were throwing around some different middle names, and I kind of like Brighton. And then my husband had heard a message from, I think there was some kind of prophet who had the name Bright. He had Bright in his name. And so when we heard that, we were like, that's really cool. And so we put it together, Joel Bright, and we thought Bright was so cute. We'll call him Bright.
I love that. And you're really naming your son after a legacy, because just because he's not here to grow up, like his life is honored here on earth, and it's also doing great things in heaven. So like
Yeah.
just the impact that he has, thinking of that, he has a legacy.
Yeah, it's true. And one of the first things I did after our loss was I read the book My Dream of Heaven, or My Vision of Heaven. And I had never heard of that book before. It's by Rebecca Ruth Springer, I think is her name. It's kind of an older book, and it's not it's basically, it's not fictional, but it's her story, her sharing of what she saw when she was sick, and she was like kind of in and out, feeling like she's in and out of her body, and she was seeing heaven. And so it was incredible. Like there were so many just visual depictions of what that was like, and seeing like her meetings with Jesus. It was just like speechless kind of response and effect on you is what happens. And so I read that book, and I just thought about like my baby's growing up in heaven, like from glory to glory. I'm gonna get there, and he's gonna be bright is gonna be brighter than I am.
Oh,
And I was
wow.
like, that's crazy, like that's so cool. And I think it's true that even now, while we're in this earth, there is a responsibility that they have there that we know nothing about, that maybe there is a role that he's playing that is very significant in what's happening here. And I'm probably I'm like the oblivious, So my son's going to be teaching me, I'm sure, when I get there.
Yes, you will recognize him when you get there. It will be so like
Woo.
beautiful. I had read someone say that they believe that there's assignments for everyone in heaven, because if you think about it, here on earth, God gives us assignments as well, gives us a purpose, gives us certain skills and talents. And they believe that it's no different in heaven. So they believe that there's, angels tending to our children kind of as they grow up, which I mean, I don't know. They could have their, their once and for all body, and they could be a grown child for all we know, and we'll just recognize them and know them. I do believe that part of it, but that we'll recognize our children right away and just know who they are, and they will know who we are as their mothers and fathers and all of that stuff. So yeah, it's beautiful to think of the stories and the visions and the things that people get, but we'll know in full when we get to heaven.
Yeah, it's very cool.
So can you tell me about someone or something that someone did that was helpful for you, just healing in your grief and loss journey and your healing?
Yeah, so I think, we had some people bring us food and thank you cards and flowers, and we even had people that gave us money, and so all of those things were so like helpful and nice. But I think, again, just the people that were willing to actually ask how I was doing, that made the biggest difference. And there was one friend in particular who, she asked how I was doing, but she also said, what can I do to support y'all? What can we do? And I think asking in such a really specific way, and being so aware that there might be a specific need that I have that she can, I just thought that was a cool way to ask how we were doing, but also to offer help too.
She's thinking of the whole family, right?
Yeah.
It's beautiful that she did that. So do you think that grief has changed you, and in what way?
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely. So many ways. I think it's made me more aware. That's for sure. I feel more educated. I feel more educated. I feel more aware. I feel less selfish. I feel more compassionate. I feel a lot of things, but I also feel less naive, I guess. In my relationship with God, I was forced to mature and develop, and no one wants to be like a surface level Christian, but and for me, like I take it very seriously. Like it's it's deep. So I have to know that I know that I know that I know that this is what I believe, and so I think going to those really hard places, and not just being willing to take the risk, but being willing to believe and being willing to have hope. So it's had a huge effect on me, but I would like to think that it's had a positive effect on me more than a negative effect.
I think from what I'm hearing about what you're saying, it definitely has just matured you in a way that you wouldn't have otherwise received. Not that, pain is entered into our lives for that reason. God doesn't just send things,
Right.
needlessly to mature us. He doesn't just take our babies to mature us, but the process of what we go through does mature us if we're willing to let God do something with it and not just make it another part of our bitter story.
Right. Yeah.
What would you say to a woman who is in your shoes, just having experienced like such an early miscarriage, and then I feel like miscarriage at 14 weeks kind of sounds hard, because miscarriage is kind of for the little babies, and yet, I mean, at that time your baby's fully formed, and small but fully formed, and you still have to go through the process of laboring to have the baby in your hands. So Where was I going with that? What would you say to a woman in
Yeah.
her shoes?
Yeah, no, that was definitely the hardest thing. There's a shock. There is an initial shock about what you are having to deal with, what you're having to experience. And for the woman versus what the man feels, it is so different.
Yes.
So different. Um, but yeah, I so many things I would say, but um I Googled. I needed to find out information. Like, what do we bury the baby in, and what can we do to make this special, and what do other people do, and what do I do? There's so many questions that you have. And so I know that the other people are probably doing that. I think other people's initial response, women are just, they want to Google, they want to find out what are other people doing. And so that helped me to find out, okay, maybe like, okay, let's take pictures. Like, I know I don't want to take pictures, but let's take pictures and let's do anything.
Did. I'm
Yeah, do
glad you
anything
did.
special. Yeah, and go buy a special blanket to put with the baby, or put a special like memento with the baby, something that I had bought beforehand that I can bury with him. And just things like that, we can really make it special. We actually bought a ring, and my husband had bought me for my birthday or for our anniversary. They're on the same day. He had bought me
Oh,
a piece of jewelry that I wasn't super fond of. And so we had like a jewelry item that we were going to return at some point and exchange it for something that I wanted. And so we just kind of had this jewelry item. And my husband was like, why don't you exchange it for something with his birthstone? And I was like, that's such a great idea. And so we took I think it was days or a week, within that time period after we lost him and buried him, we went and exchanged the jewelry and got a ring with his birthstone. And so that was just something very, very special that we did. So I would say do those things because it helps, and you can, you can carry that with you. But also just be in your grief and take as long as you need. Like, be in that hard place. Don't be afraid to go there. But also, you know yourself better than anybody else. And so once you are ready and you can pinpoint the things that are actually going to help you replace all the pain and replace all the hurt with things that God has for you, then make a decision and do it. Don't, it's okay to wait in the grief, and it's okay to process and heal and be there as long as you need to. But when the time is right, find those things that you can like hold on to move forward and to heal.
what is one of those things that you've been doing? I can't remember. Is it like 6 months after everything happened with Bright? Maybe that time frame. I'm not 100% sure, but
Yeah.
maybe around 6 months.
Yeah. Gosh, I've actually done quite a few things. I tried to do I've tried to do it all, I think. I mean, at first I did absolutely nothing. I tried to live in a black hole. That helped for a while. It did. It helped. And then I tried to, get some vision about my life and drown myself in work so that I felt like I had purpose, and that helped too. I also tried to do like a retreat by myself, and I learned a lot there. And then I went to go see a counselor at one point. I talked with friends. I read like 2 or 3 grief books. Like, I've been trying to just do it all. But I think there's one specific memory that I have that probably tops it all. And I had a dream one night, and I woke up really early, like in the middle of the night. I had a dream that my firstborn son died. And the whole thing come back, and it just haunts you. And it's like that It's like yuck, and it just gets all over you. And so I couldn't go back to sleep because I didn't want to finish that dream. I was like, nope. I just felt like in that moment he spoke profoundly. And there was a really deep healing that came to me by just being willing to just sit there and be quiet. And even though it was painful, to just ask him to come and say something. And through like praying and singing and trying to ask the Lord, I just felt like there was this exchange that happened where there was just a healing that took place on the inside of me that kind of got rid of this fear of my other children dying. And that spirit of fear is not okay. And when we experience this heavy level of trauma, it wants to come back and it wants to rule our lives, but it doesn't have any right to. And so I think that for me, that was like the best thing that could have happened was that just real healing that happened in the presence of the Lord.
I love that. God does want to bring will healing, that it doesn't affect the other healthy areas of our lives. And you brought up a good point, because a lot of us, especially women, when we've experienced a death, then we fear the death of living children, or if we're trying to have more children, we fear the death of an unborn baby. And God wants to heal us from that, because he has not given us a spirit of fear, love,
Right.
power, and a sound mind. And he's also has good things in store for us. He has life for us. So sometimes the enemy work overtime to try to speak death over us, or our mind and our thoughts, but we have to submit those to Jesus. So that's a good point. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. All right. So my last thing is, how can people get in touch with you if they really just feel connected to your story? They want to follow you. I don't know.
Yeah. So I have a blog and coaching service information on laughingovertomorrow.com. It's a platform I use for worship and writing and all of the things. So laughingovertomorrow.com. That's how they can reach me.
And this girl is very creative, because I've seen, it's like, okay, so she's detail oriented. She can help with, virtual assistant stuff, but here she has a very creative side where I see you playing the piano and singing, and I'm just like, who is this person? Like, she has a lot of talents. So seriously, Jade Smith has a lot of talents.
You're so sweet. Thank you.
So thank you for being with us, and it's been good